Hello, everyone. It is time for another fountain pen review. You know, I like doing fountain pen reviews, and I really like doing fountain pen reviews when the fountain pens I review are pens I really like. And so before I begin, a quick thank you to Gold Spot Pens who loaned the pen for today's review. I do have to return this one after I'm done reviewing it, which makes me sad because it's a pen I like a whole bunch. So, dun, 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 dun. If you know this, if you know me, if you've watched many of my reviews, you know this box makes me happy. It's a dangerous box, but it makes me happy. This is the box for a Visconti, and it is the box for a Visconti Millennium Arc Moonlight Burgundy. So that's a lot. We'll talk about why it is a lot when we get inside the pen here. So standard Visconti box, you know, you've got the nice Firenze logo on the top. Open up the box. 2% law there. And inside you get a pretty standard Visconti clamshell case. It's got the Visconti logo embossed on the top. It's got the little drawer on the side that you can pull out. It's got a booklet in there from Visconti about the pen. And then you open up the pen and reveal this little beauty. So the Visconti Millennium Arc series is a fairly new series of pens. It's a limited edition series that Visconti put out, and it came in 4 colors. There was a rainbow edition, which is maybe a little too on the nose for my daily use, but then there's the Moonlight series, which with 3 pens in blue, burgundy, and green. This is the burgundy version. Very pretty pen. But the thing that makes the Millennium Arc series unusual is the filling system. So many moons ago, Conklin, the US-based company Conklin, invented the crescent filler. And it's a filler that basically, you can see here, you press down on the filling system. It depresses a bar inside the barrel, which squeezes a latex sac, or in this case, a silicone sac. And then when you release it, the sac sucks the ink up into the barrel of the pen, or into the sac itself. So this is a very similar filling system. I believe Conklin owns the trademark for crescent filler, so they can't call it that, which is why they call it the arc filler. So this is the kind of standard Visconti bridge that you normally see on their clips. This is kind of mirrored here in the filling system. So let's kind of go over the whole design review. Right up here at the top, you've got this kind of rounded top with just a little hint of a point on there. A spring-loaded clip, which is really quite nice. And you'll notice, I mean, Visconti is kind of known for its bridge clips. Some people like them, a lot of people really don't. This is the first Visconti I have seen that kind of eschews that bridge clip in its existing form. It's still got a lot of that same arc to it, but the kind of swooping at the end is a nice departure if you don't like that bridge clip. And it is, as I said, spring-loaded, which I like, but some people think keeps the pen from being particularly effective. It feels pretty tight to me. I've got the little screw in the back of the cap here to kind of connect the spring system in place. And you've got the Moonlight icon here, some nice engraving around the back, and then Visconti Firenze there. Then you come down to the barrel. The barrel is basically, it's pretty nondescript except for this big filling system here. So the way it works is this little collar rotates until there's a slot here, and then you can press down the filling system and release it. And then when the pen is full, you just rotate the little collar around, and this locks the filler down so you don't accidentally squeeze ink all over yourself. It's a pretty straightforward system. It's actually pretty easy to clean too, because you're just, you know, doing this with the nib underwater, and it cleans pretty quickly and pretty easily. Now, I read online that this particular pen uses a silicone sac rather than a latex sac, and those silicone sacs generally tend to last a lot longer. This is the first pen I've ever used that has one, but if they're anything like for instance, the ply glass sacs that the old Parker 51s used to use, those things will last forever. Visconti said there's a 100-year warranty on the sack in this pen. So in theory, if anything ever happens to the sack, you should be able to get it fixed pretty easily. Underneath the pen, underneath the cap, so you've got 1.5 turns. You've got a metal section and some threads here, and you can see the numbering for the limited edition. This is 90 or 79, I think. Yeah, 79 of 200. So there's 200 in each color. And then you've got the nib. Now this is kind of an unusual nib. This is what Visconti calls their chromium Smart Touch, or Smart Touch Chromium 18 nib. It's totally tubular, dude. So it is an unusual shape for a nib. It wraps all the way around the feed. Now, Chromium 18 it's basically stainless steel. It's a slightly different formula for steel, or maybe not stainless steel, but it is basically steel. Slightly different formula, but this is, for all intents and purposes, a steel nib. It's going to behave very much like a steel nib, so you will want to be aware of that. Now, it is my understanding that having this wraparound nib actually helps a lot with both ink flow and with keeping the nib from drying out. I can't verify those claims other than to say my experience has been this pen has no problems with ink flow, and I've never had it dry out on me. It is a screw-in nib unit, so if for some reason you really do need to get in there and clean it out, you can. You can just unscrew the nib unit. That is both good and, as I discovered to my detriment, a little not so good when I first got the pen. So the nib unit was actually loose when I got the pen. And you can see here, when the nib unit is screwed in properly, the arc filler is supposed to be on the top of the pen. When I got it, the nib was 180 degrees the other direction, so it was like this. So I had the arc filler digging into the web of my hand as I wrote, which was not great. Also, because it was loose, it was leaking air, and so air would get up and it would blurp ink quite a bit. And I got really frustrated with it at first, and then I was just like, oh, wait a minute, turned it 180 degrees. It was completely tight, and I haven't had any problems with it since. So just be aware, if you get your pen and for some reason the top of the nib isn't lined up with the arc filler, you might need to tighten the nib unit down just a tiny little bit. I actually like the ability to remove a nib unit, to just unscrew the nib unit. It makes for, if you have to do deep cleaning, if you let an ink dry out in there, or you put an ink in that's got a lot of particulate in it, like, you know, Shimmertastic or the J-Urban 1670 inks, that's a real nice thing. The section is concave, and it's pretty comfortable, a touch narrow, and, you know, I don't love these glossy metal sections. I prefer a textured metal section because you can see it picks up quite a few fingerprints pretty easily. So, in any case, really nice pen, really lovely material. I love the, oh, and see, this is the other thing that I get a little frustrated with. It's fixable. I mean, you just have to figure out where on the pen you start the threading in order to get it to line up. So if you start the arc with the arc on the bottom, generally it will line up perfectly. But if you're the kind of person like me who kind of fiddles with his pens or doesn't always pay attention when recapping them, that can get a little in the way, you know, if you're one of those people who cares about it being lined up. This burgundy material is probably not the one I would have picked for myself, but I really like it. I mean, you can see here just how pearlescent or chatoyant it is. A lot of swirl, a lot of motion. It does have that almost nebula-like effect to it, which does evoke, kind of an outer space-like feel. I do like this material a whole bunch. I even like the burgundy. Even though this would not have been the material I would have picked for myself, I like it quite a bit. So that's really nice. All right, so let's do a few comparisons. I'll show you how this stacks up to the other pens I've got sitting around here. So in terms of affordable pens, you've got the TWSBI Eco, the Pilot Metropolitan, And here's an Esterbrook J for comparison's sake. And I am unfortunately missing my Lamy. It's in the other room. I was doing some ink review prep the other day, so I don't have it in here with me, but you can, if you know the Eco, you get a pretty good sense of what this is comparable to. And then some more expensive pens. We're looking at the Mont Blanc 149. So the Mont Blanc is larger and chunkier. Got the Pelikan M1000 and the Pelikan M800 for comparisons. And then just here's a couple of other random ones. A Stipula Etruria Rainbow Limited Edition and a Platinum 3776. So that gives you some other comparison sizes. In terms of measurements, you're looking at, it's a long pen at 144.2 millimeters. When it's uncapped, it's not quite as long, so you're looking at 125.6 millimeters. And the pen does post. It doesn't post terribly securely, and this is one where I might be a little concerned about marring the finish on the back if I were to post, and it's pretty long when posted. So you can see here, it's 172.5 millimeters. And by the way, this is just a pen I don't post. I've not seen the need to do so yet. So the measurements for diameter, you've got 10.5 millimeters in the middle of the section. The widest point of the barrel is 13.2 millimeters, or if you want to count the, the collar here, that's 15 millimeters. And then 15.9 millimeters is the widest point of the cap. And weight-wise, it's only 17 grams uncapped and 32 grams capped or posted, so a nice middleweight pen. It's not super light, not super heavy, works out quite nicely. Okay, so let me go ahead and do the writing sample, the quote for you, and then we'll talk about how this nib writes, because it's kind of an interesting nib. So here we go. This is the Visconti Millennium Arc. Moonlight. Oh, that's not where I wanted to dot my I. And the nib is a Smart Touch S-M-A-R-T. Chromium 18, which, as I mentioned earlier, is basically kind of a steel nib. And it's a 1.3 millimeter stub. The ink is Hiroshizuku Tsukiyo, which is a very nice blue-black with a bit of a green undertone there. So I like this ink a lot. And here is your quote. Okay, so I'm not a huge user of stub nibs, and generally speaking, I don't know how well you can see it here. I'll cut in some photos of the nib again. This is an untipped stub nib, and generally I don't care for untipped stub nibs, but they've done a couple of pretty smart things. For starters here, if you can see that, they have kind of, because this nib is tubular, it's kind of curved like that, they flattened out the very tip and turned it up a little bit. So the stub nib tip is, in fact, again, I don't think you're going to be able to see this very well, is pretty straight there on the edge. It is quite a smooth stub, even though I don't generally like untipped nibs, untipped stub nibs. This one is pretty nice. It's very comfortable in the hand. Or sorry, that's not what I meant to say, but it's a very nice writer. It's wet, but not, well, I mean, this is a wet, wide, juicy nib, which is kind of, frankly, if you're going to use a stub, that's what you want. You want a wet stub nib, in my opinion. It helps the nib glide across the paper very, very nicely. Now, as I mentioned, this is essentially a steel nib, so you're just not going to get a lot of line variation. You can get a little bit of give to the nib, just a tiny little bit. It feels just a bit softer than your standard steel nib. That may have something to do with the shape and the narrowness of the tines here, but I could just be imagining that. Fortunately, with the stub anyway, because it is such a wide stub, you are going to get kind of line variation anyway, and I don't know how well you can see this, but though there is some wetness, there you go, you can see the wetness from that this nib lays down when you do put a little bit of pressure on the nib. Reverse writing, it does a wonderful job. It doesn't do a much thinner line, but it does a drier line, but it's very smooth, tines perfectly in alignment. It's really quite a pleasure to write with. It is, of all of the stub nibs I've ever used, the one where I seem to have the easiest time keeping it aligned properly with the paper. Now, so here's the thing, I tend to approach the paper from a diagonal here. You'll notice that my hand and the way I hold the pen to the paper is kind of diagonal. I have found that when I write with stubs, I almost have to write it with it like this, where it's directly parallel to the paper instead of at an angle. Here, I find I can write at an angle without too much difficulty. And I get a slightly more angular look to my writing, which is kind of why you would pick up a stub or something like this. It's a little difficult for me to maintain because I have to kind of stay a little, I'm having a very difficult time speaking today, but I have to keep the pen a little higher angle than I generally tend to write with a slightly lower angle, and this pen requires just a touch higher of an angle than I usually write with. But again, this is being very nitpicky about it. It writes beautifully. It is probably the top 2 or 3 stubs in terms of smoothness I've ever used. Part of that is the wetness. Part of that is the way it's ground and shaped. You know, stubs do give a bit more feedback, generally speaking. I'd put this somewhere between a 3 and a 4 on my scale, but it's not bad and it's not unpleasant at all. The fine line is very fine. The wide lines are nice and wide and juicy. So this is really quite a nice nib. Now, I seem to have had a few pens lately where it's been a steel nib on a more expensive than normal pen. And that is kind of the situation we find ourselves in here as well. So this is a pen that lists, let me find it here, for $349 US. That's the list price, and like many luxury retailers, Visconti doesn't allow their authorized retailers to put the retail price advertised on their website. So you can assume it's probably going to be about 20% off of that price is my guess. So 70 bucks off approximately. It'll probably sell for around $280 is my guess retail. It is pretty expensive for a steel nibbed pen. If you like stubs, I think you would love this stub nib. It's beautiful, it's gushy, it's wet, it's juicy. I unfortunately have never had a chance to try a chromium, one of their Smart Touch nibs, in a round nib, so I can't speak to that at all, but I will say that I have really enjoyed playing around with this stub nib, even though stubs aren't normally my thing. You know, it's a very uncommon filling system. It's a well-known filling system, but one that most manufacturers don't use these days. And once again, I got the, I always miss the starting. Oh my goodness. Come on, Matt. You can do it. No, come on. There we go. Yeah, this is one of those things. Well, anyway, it's, if I had one complaint about the pen, that's it. I just, you know, I get it. There's one spot that will always work when you line it up. There you go. So once you learn where that is, it's a lot easier. But for me, I just don't often pay that much attention when I'm capping my pen. And so I'll do it, and then I'll be, oh, that's not what I wanted, and I'll undo it, and I'll back it up a little bit, but then I go too far. And so it just takes a little playing around with. That's about the biggest complaint I have with the pen. It's a gorgeous material. Like most Visconti pens, the body of the pen is just really, really nicely made. The only quality control problem I really had with the pen was that the nib was unscrewed half a turn, but that was very easy to remedy, and that's the only thing I've done to the pen is just tighten that nib unit back up again. So, thank you again to Gold Spot Pens for providing this pen or loaning this pen for review purposes. I am, as I mentioned earlier, sad to have to send it back. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous pen, and I may have to put either the blue or the green one on my to investigate list for the future. Now, these are limited editions, so if you're one of those fear of missing out kind of people, I'd suggest you don't wait a whole lot longer. I know already the rainbow version of this is getting a little trickier to find, but the blue, green, and red versions are still out there. They're gorgeous pens. They write really, really nicely. So that has been my review of the Visconti Millennium Arc Moonlight in Burgundy. And as I said, thanks to Gold Spot Pens for loaning this pen for review. If you have questions or comments, you can leave them on the YouTube channel page or on penhabit.com. And also, if you haven't lately, head over to Penhabit. I've got a bunch of giveaways either going on or coming up soon, so make sure to check back often. And you can also get announcements for giveaways and new reviews on Facebook, facebook.com/penhabit or @penhabit on Twitter. Those are usually the best places to find announcements. And allow me to put a quick plug in also for the Pen Addict Slack channel. If you don't know Slack, it's a website that's kind of like a big chat room. And Brad Dowdy of the Pen Addict podcast and blog set this up. There's a great group of people who get in there and chat about pens in a bunch of different channels, so you can, you know, see the for sale or giveaways or talk about pens or paper or ink. And it's a great group. I've been spending a lot more of my time there since I, you know, at the time of recording, don't have a job, so I've got the time to spend there, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit. So if you're new to the hobby and want to get to know some other pen people, head over to the Pen Addict Slack channel. It's a good group over there. And while you're at it, in fact, go check out the Pen Addict podcast and blog, because there's a lot of great stuff on that blog as well. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you here next time on the Pen Habit. Bye.